Hi class, today I have just a few things to say about Chapter 11, Modern Feminism and American Society. One of the most important things that I think we need to take away from this chapter is that there are a lot of different reform movements and a lot of different currents of feminism. Just because someone was interested in expanding civil rights for a particular group, or particularly if they were interested in women's rights, that doesn't mean that their end goal was the same, or that the methods they wanted to pursue to achieve that goal are the same. We have a lot of different strands of feminism that we talk about in this chapter, mostly because there were a lot of good reasons that women couldn't work together or didn't want to work together. In many ways, feminism emerged from the civil rights movement that started in the late 50s and really took off in the early 60s. Women were interested in achieving civil rights as were men. A lot of people are working together to get civil rights for African Americans especially, and women started to criticize the fact that they were left out of many leadership positions within the movement. And they started to think, as long as we are working for equal rights for people of different races, shouldn't we also work for equal rights for people of different genders? Within the civil rights movement and the other movements that emerge, there is a little bit of resistance against women's rights. People in these movements are concerned that an emphasis on women's rights will take away from their goals of achieving equal rights for African Americans, or an end to the Vietnam War, which was another major reform movement in this era. So these groups actually, at first, worked against women's rights. The book talks about how the 1964 Civil Rights Act led to an emphasis on getting women more equal representation in employment, and how that led to the organization of the National Organization of Women. In 1966, the National Organization of Women, or NOW now, was formed in order to address women's concerns about legal and employment discrimination. It was a huge group. It was very broad-based, a lot of members. And part of the disadvantage to having a large membership is that you can't really be very radical. You have to focus on an agenda that's palatable to most of your members. What branches off of NOW is the women's liberation movement. And this is something that is not organized. It's not one big organization that we can point to saying they embody women's liberation, but it's a larger movement. Women's liberationists, in addition to hoping that they could achieve legal and economic equality for women, were also interested in getting social equality for women. They addressed the many areas of life, especially in women's private lives, where the different treatment of men and women negatively affected them. So the women's liberation movement shared a lot of goals in common with NOW, but they also had a lot of things that were separate. And these two groups worked together on some things, but in general they had a different set of goals. Several very important strands of feminism emerge among women of different minority races. These women have two separate battles to fight. Among the larger feminist movement, it's dominated by white women, and minority women worried that these women had their own prejudices that were keeping them from seeing the plight of minority women, and that they were focused, that the white feminists were focused on issues that were specific to white women and weren't interested in addressing issues that Black women or Asian women or Hispanic women faced. So there was a lot of tension among feminists because they weren't sure that everyone was getting their needs met. Minority women also faced a lot of difficulty within their own communities. Many of these women were activists in the Black civil rights movement or civil rights movement for various other races. And when they tried to pursue equal rights for women, they were accused of acting like white feminists. They were accused of acting too white. It was a very difficult thing for these women to make their male counterparts understand exactly how important it was that they also achieve gender equality. Well, that's about all I have for today's video. I apologize if there are weird noises in the background. My neighbors are being kind of loud today. So I hope you enjoyed this chapter, and I look forward once again to reading your comments on the discussion forum.